Joining me now in Washington is Ihor Kozak, military and geopolitical analyst, also vice president of the League of Ukrainian Canadians. Ihor, thanks so much for taking time for CTV News Channel this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
I just first initially want to get your reaction as you were watching this play out live on TV. Stunning to see such an exchange played out from the White House, playing out on live TV. Just your initial reaction to seeing what happened during this meeting.
Well, the meeting was a disaster, obviously. The press conference, as you said, was canceled. The natural resources deal was not signed, and only God knows what's coming next. Chaos, as the best way to describe it. But then, in Washington, D.C. these days, there is chaos every day, whether it's dealing with Russian aggression against Ukraine, or dealing on Trump's tariffs for Canada, or dealing on the multitude of domestic policies. So it's not a surprise. What I was surprised is that how bad it went, considering that there were every indication that this time around would be different and was supposed to be a great success. I was on your channel a couple of days ago when we talked about the deal that was worked by the American-Ukrainians team, and everything was ironed out, notwithstanding Trump's rhetoric was ready for signature. We also saw that President Trump yesterday extended sanctions against Russia for another year. We also saw that this morning, before coming to the White House, President Zelenskyy had a very good meeting in the U.S. Senate with some key senators, including Lindsey Graham, for example, a leading American senator, and it went extremely well, from what I understand. And then it started okay in the White House. And then President Trump, assisted by Vice President Vance, essentially, as you saw, attacked President Zelenskyy. And if you strip all the rhetoric, if you strip all the insult, it essentially comes down to one thing. When President Trump said, "Accept the deal or we are out," and if you're talking about what's that peace deal, it at the end of the day probably means two things. One is that give in to Putin, give Putin what he wants, and then secondly, that Donald Trump and Americans will take what's left, the rare minerals and so on, giving really nothing as exchange. So I have to give credit to President Zelenskyy here, who stood his ground. Not only he was doing it only for himself, but also for the people, Ukraine, the soldiers, all the civilians who fighting and been dying over the past 10 years, especially over the past 3 years, doing so for benefit of Ukraine, but also for the stability and security of the free world, including United States of America. And I guess the big question here is what will happen next? Well, we see that President Trump said that he does invite President Zelenskyy to the White House when he's ready to talk further or make the deal. At least a couple hours ago, that was the rhetoric in the White House. I am hopeful. I am hopeful that the cool heads will prevail, and then the logic will prevail, and I'm hopeful because for the past 10 weeks working here in Washington, I know there is still very strong bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress for Ukraine and the free world, which is, is to stand up against Russian aggression. I also know that, according to the Reagan Institute, for example, one of their latest polls, over 80% of Republicans are supporting Ukraine, and they are, recognizing Russia as the national threat to the United States of America. And I'm just hoping that, the Republicans in the Congress across the country will force Donald Trump, to accept the reality and to do the right thing here. I'm also hoping that European Union, Canada, other free countries will step up to the plate and will close this gap, or the crack that has been, happening here and expanding in this Euro-Atlantic stability framework we've been enjoying for so long. And I certainly know that the people of Ukraine will not give up. They will continue fighting for Ukraine and also for the free world.
You mentioned a meeting earlier today with, U.S. senators, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. And then after this meeting, he's already commented. I want to play what he had to say after the meeting and then get your reaction compared to having a meeting with Lindsey Graham earlier in the day. So let's listen to this reaction.
What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelenskyy again. I think most Americans saw a guy that they would not want to go in business with. The way he handled the meeting, the way he confronted the president was just over the top. So I think the relationship between Ukraine and America is important, vitally important. But can Zelensky do a deal with the United States? After what I saw, I don't know.
So, Ihor, from mentioning that there was a meeting with Lindsey Graham before this meeting to then seeing that reaction post-meeting, I just want to get your thoughts on hearing the reaction from U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham.
Well, look, I mean, it seems to be the modus operandi in Washington, D.C. these days. The reality is that nobody wants to challenge Donald Trump, whereas U.S. Senator representatives were the high-ranking Republican Party officials, business community, just because he has so much power right now. There's so much happening, and nobody wants to be on the right, on the wrong side, so to speak. And therefore, people do have good meetings. People in private conversation discuss certain things, looking for the reasonable solutions. And then when Donald Trump and the White House intervenes and make a strong statements, essentially the Republican Party and those in the U.S. Congress, where it's Speaker Mike Johnson or others, get in line behind President Trump, and they're trying to react, and they're obviously trying to support him. So I think in the immediate future, this is how it's going to look like. But I think I'm hoping that the long term, as I said, I hope the logic and the cool heads will prevail, and the American people, the Republican Party, the Congress, and the president will do the right things, not so only for the benefit of Ukraine, but frankly for the benefit, security, stability, prosperity of United States of America and the entire free world.
I should mention that we're hoping to hear from Canadian officials shortly, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly at some point at this hour. But my question to you is, what type of pressure in the aftermath of this meeting does this now put on other NATO allies? We saw the heads of France and the UK there this week and talking about Ukrainian security. But now in the after this meeting, those allies, including Canada, what type of pressure is now on NATO to shore up more support for Ukraine?
Well, I think that the pressure is tremendous, with support for Ukraine, but not only. It's also the matter of their own national security. Like for decades, as I said, the Euro-Atlantic community has been enjoying this critical partnership between the United States and the European country under the NATO umbrella. And Article 5 was there to ensure that the attack on one member would be attack on the entire alliance. And that was a very powerful deterrence during the Cold War and after the Cold War. But it seems to be it's not the case anymore. It looks like the countries like Canada or the European Union members or other allies cannot count on the Trump administration, the United States, and therefore they need in very short order to ensure that they beef up their security, they increase spending on defense, and clearly, that they work with Ukraine, because the Russian aggression after Ukraine could be on their borders and in their countries as well. We know that President Putin infamously said at one point the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. Clearly, the Kremlin does not intend, to stop this war, even if there is a ceasefire. That would be just an opportunity for them to regroup and then to continue on to rebuild the Soviet Union and to build new Russian empire. And therefore, the Western world needs to be ready, and they certainly should align with Ukraine. It needs to be a two-way street. Yes, they need to assist Ukraine with weapons, with training, with finances, with various other resources, but Ukraine has also so much to offer. It has a million-strong military, very experienced military, knowing how to fight Russian. It has the multitude of the innovative technology, and it can offer some art as part of this, collective stand, to Putin. And President Zelenskyy has, already offered to Europeans to create European security forces, and Ukraine certainly wants to be part of this.
Ihor Kozak, geopolitical and military analyst, also vice president of the League of Ukrainian Canadians. Ihor, greatly appreciate your time and insight today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.